Hi, folks. My name is Richard Bolstad, and I, first of all, began my professional career by training as a registered psychiatric and general nurse, and then as a teacher, and then as a psychotherapist. So that was my first kind of collection of careers. When I left government service and moved out into my own business, so I began focusing on teaching two other things. One was NLP or neuro linguistic programming, and the other was traditional Chinese exercise or Qigong. And so that in itself was somewhat of a shift. In 2017, I became interested in another whole kind of career path. When we look at people who are highly successful, often what we remember them for may not be their first career at all. So if you think of Arnold Schwarzenegger, you probably think of him as a movie actor, a movie star, he would say. You may think of him as a governor. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you may remember that he actually started off as uh, a bodybuilder. So that's quite a different career when you think about it. It looks obvious now in terms of the first movies he got into, but that is quite a shift. If you think of Vera Wang, if you know who she is, you may think of her as a fashion designer. Of course, she was originally a figure skater, which is again quite a completely different field. There's a very famous film that looks at Julia Childs, and she began as a spy for the British government, and then most people didn't even know that about her. They know her as a host of cooking programs on television. So my shift into archaeology and history was a little bit like that. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that you in your life as well are going to reach points where you realize that the path you've been moving along is not as productive or not as interesting to you as it was at the start. And that may be nothing to do with your personal development. It may be something about what's happened in the world outside, that technology um, has taken over the area that you were working in, something like that. So, or the economy has changed in such a way that this is not a useful thing for you to be doing with your time. So, of course, at those times, the question is, how do you find something that is exciting enough to engage you in a new direction? And my belief is that when people do that successfully, and I'm now looking at huge amount of research over the last 10 years uh, on how people shift in that way. And my belief is that usually this happens not because they do something completely different to everything they've done in their life, but because they kind of track back to what's really important to me and what really inspires me and has from the very beginning. So, so this means that they somehow have a method of going back to uh, what are their deepest values. Now, in the research over the last 10 years, what we find is that the motivation, the emotion that drives them to do that is essentially what we would call nostalgia. Nostalgia has a bad press in the Western world. It usually is described as a bittersweet emotion. In Japan, nostalgia actually has a better sort of description that goes with it. It's usually considered to be the positive emotion of feeling good about experiences that you've had in the past. Now, when we actually research it, we find that what actually happens inside your brain is much more aligned with what the Japanese description would suggest. So, in fact, nostalgia involves um, activating memories, not just random memories, but memories where you had three powerful values active. And one of those values is a sense of connection with other people. Another of those values is a sense of meaningfulness, that what you were doing was meaningful in the longer term story of your life. And thirdly, a sense of being in charge, of being, NLP would call it being at cause with what you're doing. So you were choosing what you're doing rather than being swept along by the tide of society or history or whatever. So, so that description of nostalgia makes sense of how nostalgia is a signal, just like any of the other emotions. So sadness is a signal that lets you know that something has been lost and you need to look after yourself at this time. Fear is a signal that means keep yourself safe. There's something dangerous here. Uh, Anger is a signal that means your needs are being violated in some way, and you need to kind of defend those needs. And so each of these so-called unpleasant emotions are a signal, and nostalgia has a very specific signal. It reminds you that there are some values that are not fully being met in your life. So when we check people who change their life direction successfully, they access earlier memories and they find these values and think, how can I apply those in my life now? Now, in the research actually uses the kind of description of this that we would use in NLP, where we would say that nostalgia, therefore, is about traveling into the past, about traveling into the future. It's about using what NLP calls your timeline, and that's literally what it's called in the psychology research as well, which happens in a specific place in the brain. And in the research, what they find is that not only can you use nostalgia to access these earlier values, but secondly, you can also use nostalgia to access health from an earlier time in your life. One of the developers who was studied by the developers of NLP, one of the psychotherapy developers that was studied was a guy called Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson was paralyzed at the age of 17, and he did this extraordinary thing where he went back to how he had walked as a child and he thought through it again, like, how did I move my feet? How did I move my legs? How did I move my arms? How did I adjust my upper body to keep my balance? And he rehearsed himself through these earlier memories and found that it activated those memories so that he could run his body again and learn how to walk again. That's not unique to Milton Erickson. That's something in the research that we find, and the modern psychology researchers describe nostalgia as like a fountain of youth, a way of accessing earlier health responses in your body. So that would include responses that are not so caught up um, by autoimmune problems, things like that, that might have come into being over the last years of a person's life. So another way that we can use nostalgia is what's called anticipated nostalgia. And again, that involves time travel into the future. And what the researchers find is that if you do this carefully, and you do need to know how to do it carefully, if you go into the future and look back at this time, then you get a sort of deeper sense of appreciation for what is precious in this time right now. And that helps you to be motivated in your daily life as well. So anticipated nostalgia is again something that there's research on. If you think about it, this is something that we have been kind of using in personal development for some time, but this gives us a clearer way of describing it to people. So there are several different ways in which we can access and use this emotion of nostalgia to help people change direction. So if you are at a situation in your life where you're wanting to change direction, if you work with clients who are in a situation where they may want to or need to change direction in their life, then this research on nostalgia gives us some new cues about how to do that. Now, this is kind of interesting for me as an NLP trainer because usually in NLP, what we do is we look at psychology research and we say to ourselves, well, look, they are now doing the research that proves what we've been doing in NLP for the last 20 years. I did this the other way around. I went to the psychology research, I looked at what the research is showing, and I thought, how would we do that as NLP processes? So what I'm presenting on this midlife criterion shift workshop on the 1st and 2nd of August this year, I'm presenting a series of processes which are NLP processes based on the psychology research. So I know already from the research that if we do these things, you will get certain specific benefits. And what we're doing is creating a process that you can take yourself through, that you can take your clients through. So check this out. I'm running this training first on August the 1st and 2nd, 2026 in New Zealand time online. So you can join from anywhere in the world. Check it out. and find how to integrate this not only into your own life, but into what you do with clients to help them maximize what they're getting out of their life, to help them make a shift when they face a crisis time in their life, to help them build their health again, and to help them appreciate more fully what they're doing right